Pac-12, welcome to the party on Saturday and joining the rest of the Power Five on the football field this weekend, led by USC at the Coliseum, taking on Arizona State bright and early, and we'll talk about that with Matt Lowry from Conquest Chronicles in just a second. It's MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football. We're talking USC for the next hour, so jump on into the live chat. Send your comments, your questions, your debate topics for Matt and myself as we talk up the Trojans again with a key Pac-12 South Division battle against Arizona State right out of the gate. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm doing pretty good. Ready for Pac-12 football to start. It seemed kind of weird not having all of the conferences playing, but now that we have the Mountain West going, the Pac-12 is going, Big Ten's going, it feels like all is right in the world right now, even though it's a little different at the moment.
You know, the other aspect of this is that, of course, these teams typically play the out-of-conference schedule first. So they get the 2 or 3 games under their belt. USC is often played like a Stanford early in the season, maybe to break up the non-conference schedule, but at least 2 games non-conference, whether that be the likes of an Alabama, like they were scheduled to play this year, or maybe a couple group of 5, some teams out of the Mountain West. Somebody, I don't necessarily want to downgrade them to a warm-up game by any stretch, because those teams have been very capable of challenging the likes of USC, but at least games to get yourself set and understand who you are and what you've got before you dive into a key conference game like USC does right out of the gate against Arizona State in the Pac-12. So it's intriguing also from the aspect that right out of the gate, key game in the Pac-12, key game toward determining who may come out of the Pac-12 South.
Yeah, with this weekend's game between USC and Arizona State, from the jump, this is going to be one of those, how can I put it? This is going to be one of those elimination games early, especially with how many games there are in the season. Initially this was the early game of the season. If we had the normal schedule, this was bound to be what I would say. This was the opener. Actually, this was the Pac-12 opener to begin with, under the normal schedule that they had. But now they're opening up again after a couple of revisions and stuff. But this is going to be a huge one. It's a 9 a.m. game, which really we were talking about off the air, that it's weird to see a 9 a.m. game, but this is a 9 a.m. game. All eyes are going to be on USC and the Pac-12 and Arizona State. And this could very well determine who wins the Pac-12 South. I mean, of course, you have Utah that's still in the mix, but really these are the top 2 teams in the Pac-12 South right now, and I'm intrigued to see how this game is going to go.
When you bring up the wake-up call, see, that's what really gets me in regards to it's one thing for any of us to get up on a Saturday morning and have to go run errands or do something like that and get up a little bit earlier than we wanted to once we wanted to, sleep in on a Saturday morning, but thinking, I got to run some errands or I got to do this or do that. Well, it's one thing to go run errands or do a little work around the house. It's one thing to have to be wide-eyed and ready to go and roll with a running your 4-5 and hitting people and being that awake at 9 o'clock in the morning. That's a completely different level of having to be awake at 9 o'clock in the morning. I know Urban Meyer made the comment, and then it was verified by Herm Edwards had made a statement. We talked Arizona State earlier this week that he was going to have to get his guys up at like 4:30 in the morning to get them fed, get them ready, get them alert and awake and ready to go, and through all the warm-ups and the stretching to get ready to play some football at 9 a.m.
Yeah, it's what a lot of people don't understand. And I mean, us, people as fans, we often say, man, that's early for us to wake up. I don't know if I'm going to be awake and see that. But a lot of people have to understand that these players, they got to wake up even earlier to prepare for the game. It's so much of a process to go through to get you ready for a game from a player standpoint, a coach standpoint, everything. So that's the interesting part. Not to mention, this is the first game that they're playing of the season. We're in November. Typically, we're halfway through. At this point, we're about halfway through the season. So you're starting the season opener. You haven't really hit anyone. I know USC's been having scrimmages at the Coliseum at 9 a.m. They've been having 9 a.m. scrimmages at the Coliseum, I believe. So they're trying to get accustomed to this whole thing as well. It's all just a brand new avenue for everybody.
So, Matt, when we look at what else is different about this game is obviously starting the season the first week in November. Number two, starting with a Pac-12 game that should factor heavily into the division championship race. And then number three, obviously, what we've all had to deal with in our lives for the last 7 months and what these football programs have had to deal with. just think about all the preparation and all the things that go into running a football program anyway and preparing these athletes for a season, all the weightlifting, the game study, the film study, the organization, the meetings, all the things, the travel, the scholarship maintenance, all the things that go on in probably, and then added on to that is we've got to educate everyone on the safety guidelines. We have to do the testing periodically throughout the week. I guess that's got to just add a whole other dimension of rules and regulations and just time consumption of time away from football to make sure everybody's safe and secure and everybody understands the guidelines and they're being followed and all the measures that are put in place. And then leading up to this game, you were telling me about how USC is going to handle just the preparation at the game in terms of getting the players suited up and ready to hit the field.
Yeah, it's a lot of things going on right now, and it's crazy. As you mentioned, it's crazy right now because we've been dealing with COVID-19 for 7 months now. It's been 7 months. Just a lot of things now, how things are changing, and this is what we have to go through. This is what we have to deal with in order to have for these athletes to have these student athletes, to have sports, to play football right now. I believe, as I saw, I want to say yesterday, that Cal and Washington just got canceled because of one positive test. Mind you, that's one player who's asymptomatic who had a positive test, and now it derailed Cal's opener because they weren't going to have enough players to field a competitive team. So that just shows you the time that we're in right now. And, and then when we talk about the wake-up call, the morning wake-up call, that's one thing compared to, how can I put it? That's just one thing on the list of a whole bunch of things that's going on right now. You're not going to have fans in the stadium. So that's already a weird aspect right now. So you won't have fans in the stadium. You got to go through testing just to make sure, hey, did I test positive? Did I test negative? Are we even going to have a game? So we have that going on. And then preparing for, like I said, getting ready for a late start in the season, and you're only playing about 7 games, 6 games, 7 if you make it to the conference title game. Oh, by the way, if you're any of these programs and the Pac-12 itself, you have to worry about one positive test derailing opener. So just so many things going on, and it's something that a lot of people at hand have to deal with.
Folks, give us your comments, your questions, your debate topics on USC football and the Pac-12, and we will serve them up to Matt, and I may have something to say as well. Mr. HD brings up something that runs through my mind in thinking about the time zone difference, because I grew up in the Midwest in the Eastern time zone. I now live on the East Coast, so everything's geared toward the TV schedules and so forth, obviously toward the East Coast. And anytime I've been on the West Coast, it's always been odd during football season to start watching college football at 9 o'clock in the morning or watching the NFL at 10 o'clock in the morning. It's always been an odd thing. Got Pete Gearson on the line as well to join the conversation on the Trojans and the Sun Devils. Pete, how you doing today?
Hey, how's it going, guys? Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Glad you could make it.
That little snippet at the bottom where people are worried about the 9 a.m. start time, but I just want to add, first of all, USC fans and USC players should be thankful that their first game of the season isn't against an undefeated Alabama team in Dallas, Texas, regardless of the start time, because that likely would have been an automatic loss for the Trojans team because Alabama, as we know, and Mac Jones look amazing. And second of all, they shouldn't be worried about the 9 a.m. start time other than the weather at 9 a.m. tomorrow in Los Angeles, because we haven't had rain here in Southern California for, 6 months. And, of course, Game 1, November 7th, 9 a.m., the storm's really supposed to hit at 9 a.m., and it's about an 80% chance of rain. So, obviously, this is Southern California boys. Not that Arizona State's any more used to rain over in Phoenix, but it could totally change the landscape of the game calling and the game plan for Graham Harrell and that USC offense, who loves to pass, who works the air raid offense. Yes, the Trojans do have 4 great running backs in their stable that they can hand the ball to, but if we get out there and it's mud football at 9 a.m., highs in the mid-50s, it definitely could be a little different atmosphere than a normal Coliseum landscape.
Did I hear highs in the mid-50s?
Yeah, it's crazy because yesterday it hit 90 in LA. It was mid-80s in Santa Barbara yesterday, and today it's still beautiful out. It's sunny. It's in the 70s, and then all of a sudden we have this cold snap coming through California with a little bit of wet weather. So yeah, I mean, it is something notable because most of the time at the Coliseum, I've been there plenty of times in October where it's pushing 90, pushing triple digits.
Yeah. So that's definitely, we can all relate to that to a certain extent. It's one thing to be outside and be prepared for 50-degree weather and ho-hum. It's not that big a deal, even if you're used to West Coast weather. But when it was 90 degrees 2 days earlier, my goodness, because right now I'm not going to be able to brag about this for long, but it's going to be more like in the 70s here on Saturday. So we're still holding on to our last bit of, I won't say summer weather, but nice fall weather here. So to hear mid-50s in LA and rain, and then again, the shock of that being 90 degrees a couple of days earlier is
Hey, well, the 2020 mark where nothing's predictable anymore. And I'm sure people will be watching other things on TV tomorrow morning still instead of a nationally televised game. But really, this game is huge for the Pac-12. It's huge for both programs because this is a really resume-building game. It's on Fox, big noon. It's a nationally televised game. Because it's so early here, it'll be easily accessible for those Eastern Conference audiences. And these are two of the best teams in the Pac-12 South, if not the best two teams. Two of the best quarterbacks in the entire conference. And it's really going to be a proving game for both these teams to show that they're legit and show that they need to run the table after winning this game to make the Pac-12 title game and then maybe get a bid for, a CFP.
So we've got a bit of a different flavor here than a lot of USC shows that people will come across in that, my viewer base comes from all over the place. So I'm seeing Michigan people, Florida State, Clemson people already in the chat here. So they need to get familiar with USC football, especially since the Trojans have been on the sideline for so long and the Pac-12 as well. So Jordan, Clemson fan here, looking at USC schedule, says they should be favored to win every one of their games. And Pete, I know that's something we discussed the last time we were together.
Yeah, it's totally right. Jordan Bowman, Clemson fan, he's right on the money here because other than this week against Arizona State and then in 2 weeks, November 21st, the Trojans travel to Salt Lake City and face Utah, a team that they've struggled against in Utah over the past few years. Remember, they lost a couple of years ago with Sam Darnold as the Heisman favorite that year. They lost in one of Sam Darnold's first ever games as a Trojan quarterback 4 years ago. They somehow won with Matt Fink, their backup quarterback, last year in Los Angeles. But this Utah team's different. We talked about it Their quarterback's gone. Zach Moss, the reigning Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Year, is gone. They lost 5 defensive players to the NFL draft. I've actually been watching these guys on Sunday. Oh, yeah, those guys played on Utah last year. So that's not going to be the same Utah team, but you have to respect Utah on the road. And then USC comes back home, faces Colorado, a team they've never lost to. And they go, their only cross conference game where they face a Pac-12 North team is against Washington State, possibly one of the weakest teams in the Pac-12 North. And then you end the season December 12th against UCLA. And we all know UCLA hasn't posed much of a challenge over the last few years. The Josh Rosen game a couple of years ago at the Coliseum, UCLA has posed a challenge, but we know this year they probably won't match up with USC talent-wise. Yes, last year they beat USC when Jayden Daniels was the quarterback, and then a few years before that, Josh Rosen was the quarterback, and it was a close game versus Sam Darnold. But you're right. It's supposed to be an easy schedule for the Trojans, other than this week 1. And because of the rain, because these teams haven't practiced and haven't played a full game recently, it could be some little things to iron out. There could be some issues. And Clay Helton said it, watching other teams play around the country, you've seen a lot of kind of mistakes, penalties, things that you just need to clean up in the first few weeks. And these two teams haven't had the luxury of playing any games and getting into that game style mood. I have heard that the Trojans have been practicing early this past couple of weeks and doing run-throughs early in the morning, workouts early, just to get their mind and bodies ready to play at that time of the day. But it's going to be, I mean, if you can't get up for a 9 a.m. start to start the season, both these teams have been wanting to play all season long. If you can't get focused and get up and get energized, which I'm sure all these players will, then you shouldn't be playing football, because these guys are going to be pumped up. They only have 7 games to prove it. And I really think everyone should tune in tomorrow, because you got 2 of the most exciting young quarterbacks in the league, 2 standout wide receiver cores. Arizona State's defense in their secondary actually is the strongest part of their defense, and they're going to be matched up against the best wide receiver core in the Pac-12 conference, one of the best wide receiver groups in the country, with Tyler Vaughns and Amon-Ra St. Brown, Brew McCoy. We finally get to see a 5-star recruit. So it's going to be extremely fun to see those 2 teams match up. And then Jayden Daniels, who had 19 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions last year, also a bit of a dual threat guy, definitely got some wheels. So, I mean, it's going to be fun. It's going to be high scoring. USC is a 10-point favorite. I see 10.5, but I would expect Arizona State to cover. I think USC can win, but it's going to be definitely by single digits.
Yeah, Matt. So to extend on Pete's point, I apologize if anybody can hear the outside yard work and maintenance going on around me. It's pretty loud. So, Matt, to extend on that point, I don't think USC needs to apologize for any type of scheduling favors that they receive, because this program schedules tougher, or as tough as anybody in the country. I don't want to elevate them above everybody, but my goodness, they will go play anybody at any time. And obviously with Notre Dame permanently on the schedule from an outside the conference point of view, but no Oregon, no Washington. And those would be the 2 teams. Cal is a up and comer, has
and no Notre Dame
building their program. Absolutely.
Yeah, as it was mentioned, no Oregon, no Washington, no Notre Dame on that schedule, no Alabama, thankfully, on that schedule. This, honestly, between this and I would say Utah is USC's toughest games. And guess what? They get that knocked out in the first 3 weeks of the season. So how the way we look at this right now is with this game, I think with this game, and I would say Utah to an extent, but really this game, there's a lot at stake for USC. I know we say there's a lot at stake for both of these teams because of the division and because of the potential Pac-12 title. But for USC, a little bit more is at stake here, because now USC is getting thrust into the conversation of the college football playoffs. Let's keep in mind here, that's something now we've been hearing a lot about, well, will a 7-0 Pac-12 team make it into the college football playoffs, given the circumstances of what's going on? But they're now being thrusted into that conversation with the likes of Oregon. And I think ESPN put out a percentage of teams in the Pac-12 or teams in the nation who can make the college football playoffs. And I believe Oregon and USC were separated by about 2 points, by 2%. So a lot is at stake for USC here, not just you beat Arizona State, you're in the driver's seat for the Pac-12 in the Pac-12 South. Not only you put yourself in a good position to play for the Pac-12 championship, you put yourself in a position to potentially play for that and potentially make the college football playoffs. So this is a huge game for USC to really come out and to make something, and to make themselves known here. Not known, but make a impact here. That's something that's huge for USC. Now, and one thing I'm interested to see, I know a lot of people talk about the offense against Arizona State secondary. I'm interested to see USC's defense and what Todd Orlando brings against Arizona State, because we know Arizona State loves to mix it up. They love to run the ball. Jayden Daniels, as you mentioned, is a dual threat type of guy. He can, when he gets out into space, he's dangerous. And USC avoided playing, they missed out playing him because he was injured last year. But I'm interested to see how Todd Orlando's defense, and we know he runs an aggressive defense where he loves to blitz a lot and he puts his DBs on an island. I'm interested to see how that defense plays out. What does the USC defense look like? I'm very interested to see how it is, because with this amount of talent that Todd Orlando's going to have, and especially the new staff that they have on the defensive side of the ball, it's going to be interesting to see how they defend Jayden Daniels and this Arizona State offense.
I'm sorry, we've got a comment here from Mr. HD about Brew McCoy. Just threw out the name Brew McCoy. Obviously a huge recruit, but there's been a lot of controversy and just a lot of, not necessarily to the young man's his fault, but just a lot involved in his just getting him on the field and ready to play. Do we have any latest on Brew McCoy?
Other than he's playing tomorrow, there hasn't been any updates on anything. I mean, a lot of the word around Brew McCoy has been nothing but positive. He's been, McCoy has been looking very good, according to what we've been hearing and what people have been talking about. But he's really stood out. He's really been standing out in practice. And I mean, you throw him into the mix along with St. Brown, as we mentioned, Tyler Vaughn, Drake London, who had a huge year as well last year. They have a lot of receivers, and not to mention, you still have Gary Bryant Jr. and Joshua Jackson Jr. You have those two freshmen who are also going to see some good playing time as well. So a lot of talent, but Brew McCoy, it's been nothing but good things with Brew McCoy in terms of how he's been looking in practice.
Yeah, I think Brew McCoy and Amon-Ra St. Brown have really meshed. St. Brown's kind of taken him under his wing. I've seen them just through videos and stuff and through USC coaches that they've been working together a lot. They both have the high school football connection at Modern Day and stuff where Jayden Daniels went. And I think Brew McCoy, the only problem for him is going to be staying healthy because he's got such a big body. He's 6'3", 210, an absolute beast. And also finding targets, because you have Tyler Vaughn's coming back. Vaughn's had 77 catches last year for the Trojans, over 100 targets. Amon-Ra St. Brown had 74 catches last year and over 100 targets from Slovis. And this is a pass-heavy offense, but Slovis even knows Drake London, as you mentioned, even better than he does Brew McCoy. Drake London's 6'5", 225, also on the basketball team at USC. So those three guys are going to kind of command targets. You've got a great tight end in Jude Wolfe. And so it's going to be hard for guys like Brew McCoy and Gary Bryant Jr., who are extremely talented, to even get their fair share of targets, probably what they're used to getting, especially at the high school level. They know that coming in. They know choosing a big school like a USC doesn't mean they're going to be the top dog from day one. But Brew McCoy, as we all know, went from USC, did 2 weeks of school in January of 2018, and then came back, then transferred to Texas, decided he didn't like Texas, wanted to come back to home, and then came back to SC. So it should be fun to see him playing in the USC uniform, finally playing in the Coliseum. And yeah, he is on the same team now as a former Texas coach in Todd Orlando. Should we talk about here?
I'm sorry, what's that?
Should we talk about Jay Tufele here?
Yeah,
Jordan?
we got a question coming in about him, top defensive line prospect for the NFL draft, who is not going to be playing, so just trying to replace him.
Yeah, I mean, you can't replace a guy like Jay Tufele. He's over 300 pounds. He's a beast. He was a sophomore last year. He's already one of the best defensive linemen in the country. But thankfully for the Trojans, you do get a lot of that defense back. A lot of guys are becoming now from sophomores to juniors, so they have a little more experience. And the one key guy who's going from a freshman to sophomore is Drake Jackson. And Drake Jackson is a game wrecker. He can take over a game. He's almost like, a JJ Watt or any one of these edge pass rushers that can just, you have to double team him. You have to really watch him. But if they had Jay Tufele in there, the tackle position with Drake Jackson, it would have been even more of a nightmare for offensive coordinators. But with Drake Jackson in there, I don't think there's too much of a letdown. And then you have a lot of other guys that can step in for Jay who didn't get as many opportunities, but are also upperclassmen and have the experience.
Anything to add on that, Matt?
No, I mean, he basically everything was hit on the right there. Having Jay Tufele out, I mean, that still is a huge void, because as mentioned, he's one of the top defensive linemen in the nation. But you get just about everybody back and who have a season under their belt. Not to mention, we haven't talked about the secondary. USC secondary is going to be pretty good and talented as well. You know, you have Chris Steele, you have Elijah Griffin, you have Talanoa Hufanga, you have Isaiah Polamau. I mean, USC defensively should be fine. I think defensively they should be fine here, despite missing Tufele. I mean, they have enough depth on the defensive line. Not to that extent, but, you know, they have enough that it will get it done. So I think it'll have an impact, but will it have a huge impact? That's something that remains to be seen at the moment. Based off of videos that I've been seeing, this looks like this is going to be a rowdy group. You know, they already get behind each other. They're already, they're already full of energy. Vic Soto has been doing an outstanding job in practice with these guys, keeping them ready, keeping them, engaged. So I think that's going to be it's going to be something to watch. But I think USC's defense should be fine here in terms of replacing talent like that.
Yeah, I just want to add that they have Marlon Tuipulotu, who's back for his third year as a starter. So, he's no newcomer to the role. And then they also have Brandon Peely, who's 6'4", 330 pounds, who fits more of the mold of a nose tackle that Todd Orlando has used in his past defenses. So obviously you can't replace a guy like Tufele, but even last year, Matt, this, USC would always allow the big plays. They'd get an offense down to 3rd and long, and they'd allow a 20, 30-yard gain. USC was one of the worst teams in college football last year in allowing plays larger than 10 yards. And Jay Tufele had nothing to do with that. Yes, he could get some press on the quarterback, but it wasn't up to a defensive lineman to allow a 30-yard bomb down the field. So they have guys to replace it. You mentioned Talanoa Hufanga and Isaiah Polamau are two of the best safeties, I think, in the conference. And those guys hopefully can stay healthy, because Hufanga last year was constantly getting injured. And so with guys like that are extremely talented, USC's always had the talent. We know that. But I don't think they were disciplined enough. I don't think Clancy Pendergast cared about disciplining them as much. I don't think he cared about as many penalties as they racked up. Todd Orlando, I think, comes from a totally different background, a lot more strict. As you mentioned, it's a rowdy group, and they want to get after it. They want to prove their worth, because all the talk has been on the offense, how good Slovis is, how good the wide receivers are, rightfully so. But this defense has something to prove if they want to really show the rest of the country that it's a complete team.
People are excited about Gary Bryant Jr. in the 2020 class, 7th rated wide receiver in the country. top 5 prospect in California, top 50 prospect in the nation, according to the 247 Sports Composite. Obviously, the wide receiver room is stacked and loaded. He's not necessarily going to be needed this year, but do we expect him to see the field much?
He'll see the field, according to Harrell and to Helton. He's going to see the field. I mean, from what I've seen him in high school at Corona Centennial, as well as from what I've heard from Drake, from Jackson's dad, Dennis Jackson. So shout out to him. He possesses a big playability. So that's somebody who you need on the field, who adds another dimension to your offense. And I think you can't. He's somebody who you can't keep off the field like that. So I expect him to be on the field. Now, he'll be rotated in. Do I expect him to start at any point? In my view, not really, because you got to you got to take a spot from McCoy, St. Brown, Vons, and London, and I don't think they're giving up those spots anytime soon. But I think you'll see him on the field in different ways. Remember, this is the same Graham. This is Graham Harrell here. Graham Harrell is known to throw little wrinkles in there. Remember, he had Amon-Ra St. Brown at running back, and we saw what St. and he had him line up at running back just to find different ways to get St. Brown the ball. So Harrell's going to find ways to get his best playmakers the ball, and with Bryant Jr. in there, he's going to find ways to get him the ball, whether that's lining him up in the backfield or he'll line him up at tight end if he has to. He's going to find a way to get him the ball in the most creative and effective ways.
Exactly. Yeah. As you mentioned, there's not going to be a lot of room for Gary Bryant Jr., but he's a fantastic route runner, very polished in that facet of his game. He's really quick, obviously a bit of a smaller frame, but he kind of fits that Deontay Burnett type of wide receiver, or someone just said earlier, Robert Woods, definitely a slot guy, but it's just going to be hard to get him that many touches in this offense. But Clay has said that he will get a look at it, and they recruit him for a reason here at SC. He's a dangerous guy, deep, like you mentioned, and heck, maybe we'll see him returning some punts and stuff, because that's what Amon-Ra has done in the past. But I feel like this year they're going to want to keep guys a little healthier. And as you mentioned, Amon-Ra was a running back last year. That was because Vavai Malepeai and Stephen Carr and Stepp all got injured at one point. And I think it was that game at Colorado where they handed the ball to Amon-Ra St. Brown. He sprinted for a 39-yard touchdown. So that was by committee. This year, the Trojans are hoping to be a little more deep. And, with a 7-game season, that should be easier.
Got another player question coming in from Mr. HD about Gayo Teote. I'm always relying on Pete for the pronunciation on some of these names. If I don't see USC play like 3 days ago, then I forget the pronunciation on some of the names. But I'll get familiar tomorrow afternoon.
Yeah, it's that Polynesian Pele Nao Teote. It's almost the G turns to an N. That one took me a while to pronounce too, but once you see this guy play on the field and hear his name mentioned, you start to learn his name because he's that good. Super humble guy, massive. I mean, like 6'3", 230, and he looks even bigger. Very respectable guy, great leader. I think he's going to be either, the main, now that Jordan Iosef has been injured, I think he's going to be the main MAC linebacker in this defense for Todd Orlando. And yeah, I think he can anchor the defense. I think he has the leadership abilities. I think he learned from guys like Cam Smith and others in the past. And he's a fantastic tackler. I'll say that. He's not the fastest guy. He's not the quickest guy. He can't jump the highest. But if you're running back and you see him staring down the trenches and the linebacker and Nao Teote right in front of you, then yeah, he's going to do big things. Another problem with him was staying healthy last year, but so far he's coming into camp full strength, and he should be fun to watch.
Yeah, he from what I've been reading and from what I've been hearing, that he's matured a lot too. So that also plays a huge role. But you've mentioned it too. He had a chance to learn from Cam Smith. Also John Houston. He also learned from Houston as well. So he had 2 years being under experienced linebackers or playing next to experienced linebackers as well. So I think he can definitely anchor this defense. He can definitely anchor this defense for sure. And a lot of people forget that USC also has some talent at linebacker, but I think with him, he's a guy who can really stand out this year in that linebacking core.
No doubt.
All right. Appreciate Pete Garrison and also Matt Lowry from Conquest Chronicles joining us to break down USC. We thought this would be a fun conversation and an important one to kick off the Pac-12 and kick it off bright and early, at least here on the East Coast. And obviously for all of you as well, based on what you're accustomed to, if you're going to check out some football at 9 a.m., it's typically coming from the Big Ten or the SEC or somewhere else. But, man, Pete, like I mentioned to Matt before you jumped on the line, it's one thing to say, get up on Saturday morning, go run some errands, or do a little work or a little light work around the house, and it's another thing to say, go run your 4.5 and collide with some other very large men at that time of the morning. That is quite the wake up call.
Exactly, it is. But as we said earlier, these teams have been chomping at the bit, month in, month out, watching all these other teams play. And really, over the past weekend, the Pac-12 was a big winner because the Big 12 keeps beating up on themselves. After Texas upset Oklahoma State, it's going to be tough for the Big 12 to get one of those 4 spots in the CFP. So really, and we've seen people put it down here below in the comments that USC could run the table with their somewhat easy schedule. Oregon doesn't have a terribly tough schedule. Yeah, they have to face Washington and Stanford, but those teams aren't quite the same that they've been in the past. And I'm really looking forward to Graham Harrell's offense in year 2 because he said it all along. We had a great passing attack last year. They had the 6th best passing offense last year. They Slovis led set a Pac-12 record for completing 71.9% of his passes. He beat Andrew Luck's Pac-12 record that he set back in 2011 at 71.2%. But Graham Harrell's constantly said, wait until year 2 of this offense when we really get it integrated. We really get everything down. The wide receivers get another year older and having more experience. And we saw that kind of happen in the back tail of last year where Slovis had 4 games with over 400 yards in his final 6 starts. No USC quarterbacks had more than 4 400-yard games in their career. Matt Barkley also has 4, but that took him 3 years to do it. So this Slovis guy, we can keep talking him up as much as possible, but the truth is on the paper right there. The proof is in the pudding. This guy's legit. He's talented. I've also heard he's put on about 15 pounds in this offseason. He's up to 215 pounds now. So he might be able to take some of those shots better than he did last year. That wasn't his fault, obviously. He took a lot of hits, got concussed in the bowl game against Iowa. But he does have 4 starting offensive linemen returning, and the big one is Elijah Vera Tucker, because Vera Tucker also declared for the NFL draft, said he was going to leave USC and take the COVID opt-out, just like Jay Tufele did. But then once he realized there was likely going to be a season starting before Thanksgiving, he decided to come back. He wanted to prove that USC is still a powerhouse, and that's a huge piece for the Trojans on the offensive line. So I think every really area of the Trojans offense and defense looks a little more improved, a little more experienced. But obviously that air raid attack and Graham Harrell, who, by the way, a bunch of college football coaches wanted Graham Harrell to join their programs. He decided to stay in SoCal, and it's going to be fun to watch this guy work with Slovis because their relationship was great last year, and it's only going to be better this year.
We take a huge assumption in stating that all the games in the Pac-12 will be played because there have been games canceled in every other conference, but it's been a fairly minimal amount, somewhere in the 12 to 15% range. So hopefully the Pac-12 can go through close to unscathed. We know that Cal and Washington are not playing this week. So one factor in this is what games are going to be canceled, and those teams, are they a huge factor in the race or a projected factor? Like in the Big Ten, Wisconsin missing now 2 games. Well, they were the favorite of the Big Ten Western Division, and that could have a huge impact. Not discounting or disregarding any particular programs, but I'm just throwing out if Oregon State and Colorado's if they're scheduled to play, the cancellation of that game, if it's self-contained and doesn't affect other teams, then it's going to have very minimal impact, as opposed to this game or an Oregon Stanford game, or we could count down the list of, again, projected teams that should be in contention. I'm going to be interested to see if we get to this point, what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee does with certain teams across the country in regards to evaluating the schedule, because we are void of that transitive property that we would have before to say, well, USC played Notre Dame and Notre Dame's this good, and Oregon played Auburn and they're this good, and we could link it throughout the country and make some reasonable evaluation to how good the conferences are. I hope that there's not a perception that's going to be taken to practicality of, well, the Pac-12 has been down for 5 years, so the Pac-12 is still down, therefore it has to be evaluated this way, and that the results are just taken as the results. And I think I would approach it as the 4 teams with the 4 best records as conference champions need to go to the playoff.
Yep.
And there's some type of, and there will be some type of difficult comparison there, because 2 records are going to be similar. Not everybody's playing the 12-game schedule. So maybe a 7-0 USC versus a 10-1 Oklahoma State. Okay, how do we weigh that? Well, I think the only fair way to weigh it beyond the wins and losses is how dominant was that team against the other opponents on the schedule, the rest of the conference. And for USC, so they're definitely rooting for, I would think, 2 things. We could make a list of 10 things that they would be rooting for, but within the conference, that it would be great for them, of course, to beat Arizona State and then have the Sun Devils go out and win the rest of their games.
Yeah.
Be really strong. And then obviously if Oregon shows up as an undefeated team in the Pac-12 championship game and you beat another undefeated team, those are the 2 benchmarks that I think that would be huge for USC.
Yeah, I think I've heard Yogi Roth, a Pac-12 football analyst, say this before, and he made the point where, yes, we call it the college football playoff, those final few games of the year, and obviously your conference championship game is essentially also a playoff game, because if you lose that, you don't deserve to make the playoff. But really, the playoff starts week 3. This year, it starts week 1 for the Pac-12, but in the past, it's, the final few games of the regular season, it's not officially your playoff games, but it really is, because if you lose those games, your resume is not going to be strong enough to move on. So you can't, especially during 2020, you can't choose your schedule. You can't choose what games get canceled. A lot of that's going to have to do with politics and where this game's being played in which state. Like if USC is playing in Oregon, that game's more likely to get canceled because of coronavirus than it is in Utah. So there's things like that where you can't control. But looking at other team schedules like a Notre Dame they face Syracuse and Wake Forest and Boston College and 3 of the next 5 weeks. So that's not exactly the strongest schedule. If they beat Clemson though this week, then it is going to be a big boost to their resume. So I think we've got Ohio State going, we've got Clemson going, we've got Alabama going, and it's like you said, Mark. As a 7-0 Pac-12 team, going to match up against an 11-1 Oklahoma State team. We'll have to find out.
Yeah, the uniformity, and it's a difficult process in a normal year, and I tear it apart every year. And 2019 was the only year that I personally felt as though, okay, these are the clear-cut, not necessarily 4 best teams, but the 4 teams that earned the spot, and I have no criticism of the selection. But every other year, I've had a huge criticism, not necessarily of the committee and their approach, but that it's just a system in which team number 5, team number 6 has a legitimate gripe and resume that could be debated to be as good or better than, say, team number 4. Last year was, again, pretty clear-cut in regards to having it earned, but it's almost going to be an impossible scenario to which that comes out to that result again, because there's just too many variables. And again, no non-conference games, except for the big negative, as Pete, you alluded to, against the Big 12 and losing those games against the Sun Belt Conference. Yeah. So no positives to be gained from the non-conference play, but for the Big 12, that big black mark of losing a couple Sun Belt games by teams that are fairly competitive within the Big 12 upper tiers.
Hey, Jordan Bowman knows his USC roster well. Jordan, I want to say you're right. The USC defense looks pretty good on paper, but we've been saying that the last 3 years that this entire roster looks good on paper, and then they just haven't performed during the season. But you're also right that Hufanga might be the best safety in the Pac-12.
When I'm watching, Pete, I not to interrupt, but when I'm watching, he looks like an All-American.
We talked about that last year. He had like a big 15 tackle game, and that was when he kind of came, I feel like, into your notice, and you really spotted him. The guy almost averaged a turnover in every game he started last year, and he missed the game at Washington that the USC lost, and that was a big one. But when he plays, he's a turnover machine. He's a tackling machine. They have Isaiah Polamalu, Troy Polamalu's cousin, at the other safety position with Talanoa Hufanga, but I think it's Talanoa who really looks like Troy Polamalu out there flying around the field. Another one of these Polynesian guys that loves playing for his team, all these guys are so close, it feels like, at this point, especially through the whole coronavirus, now in year 3. And Talanoa, this could very well be his last year in a USC uniform, and he's fun to watch. I pray he can stay healthy because the guy is extremely talented. And yes, Jordan Bowman's right. This team on paper does look very stacked.
Guess James is looking for a little betting advice here. I don't know if he was able to work down the line for some reason, playing some kind of teaser, but he's only having to overcome 3.5 points against Arizona State.
Anything I love looking at betting lines and everything. So anything where it's 7.5 or 3.5, you got to be wary. Obviously, he bought down the line here. He's probably sitting at 3.5 at -250, -300. So he's not getting a ton of value right here. But I would take USC all the way down to -5. I think they can win by a touchdown or 2 field goals. Their field goal kicker is also great, Chase McGrath. 3.5 is an interesting line. You might as well go to 3 if you bought from 3. If you bought all the way down to 3.5. But I do see USC covering that many points. But it's tough when these teams haven't played in almost 10 months. It's tough to remember, how disciplined and how good these teams are going to be in week 1. So I would say yes, but I like to make bets or talk about betting lines in week 2 and week 3 once you have a little more resume to look at of these two teams. But yes, USC's favored. They're at home with no fans, of course. But if he's getting 3.5, then I think you can be confident about that.
So, Pete, definitely the last thing you said has a lot of validity to it, although that could be flipped around to say, why not jump on something that you like in week 1 before Vegas has more information that they can work with to set the betting lines, because they're much smarter than us. You can look at that both ways, but certainly I would say most people that have some affinity toward betting and know something would side with what you just stated in regards to, gathering some information, maybe just dipping your toe in the water there early in the season, but then gaining some information through weeks, 2 and 3. And obviously there's not a whole lot of time to lay some money this year, especially on Pac-12 games.
I think you can be comfortable with 3.5. Another way, if your betting site or whatever you use allows it, is to live bet it. You'll be able to see what the trend of the game's doing in the first quarter or first half. Maybe it's a close game and that line drops down to USC -4, -3, and then I would take that. Or USC could fall down 10-0 in the first quarter, and maybe Arizona's going to flip to be the favorite. So if you want to take the bet before the game, I think that's a safe bet, but you can always be patient and wait for that live bet.
I will say that I think most people would be surprised at how many games are upsets each week in the top 25 and in the Power 5. So I've tracked this for about 3 years, and it's about 22%. It's between 20 and 25%. And it's very consistent week to week. It's not like half the games are upsets one week and then there's not an upset for 2 weeks. It's pretty consistent that if you figure all the top 25 teams in a typical college football weekend are playing, and a few of them play each other, so there's usually 20 or 22 top 25 games, that almost like clockwork, 4 or 5 of them will be upsets. And some of them substantial upsets, 10 and 14-point underdogs winning. It's just the difficulty of pinning which 4 or 5, because as Pete alluded to, the value of the selection is almost better or more valuable than the overall betting record you have if you can find those plays against the money line for an upset pick, then you only have to hit on 40 to 45% of those, and you will make substantial money.
Yeah. I mean, one bet that you could look at would be the under tomorrow. I haven't checked what it's been updated to, especially, but as soon as I see a game with wind, rain, bad weather for two West Coast teams that aren't used to that, you might want to look at the under, because this could have been a high scoring affair in perfect weather conditions. But with rain in play, you might have to run the ball a lot more, and you might not be able to throw those deep passes like both these teams like to do. So we should look up that line before we make an assumption.
Yeah, it could change at any moment, and we've seen it. I've seen it to where on the day of the game, a line will shoot right back up, or a line will go down even more. I think this one, well, it's at 10.5 now, correct?
Yeah, looking at Bovada, it's at 11. USC favored by 11, and the over/under, the total's 56, which isn't extremely high. I could see these teams reaching it, but if there actually is a lot of rain, sometimes we get these predictions, these forecasts in Southern California, rain, wind. I remember when I played high school baseball, it'd be like, oh, sweet, baseball practice is going to be canceled now. We'd show up at the field. Coach says, nope, not a drop of rain. We're playing today, boys. So that can happen in SoCal, where they predict rain. We want rain. We haven't had rain all summer. We need some moisture to help out with the fires and everything. And then we get no rain. So you won't really know until 9 a.m. tomorrow. But if indeed there is a lot of rain, then that under could definitely hit.
Yeah, especially knowing, and as you mentioned, hasn't been a lot of rain in California, or in this case, Southern California. I know out in Phoenix, it was just 90. I was just out in Phoenix last weekend. So I know it was like 90 degrees, 88 degrees, and dry and warm out there. So it's, a lot of these teams, both of these teams haven't had the chance to deal with that type of weather. So it's more of preparing of what are you going to expect? And if it does indeed rain, you're going to see a lot of the run game being featured here. Exactly. Now, who does that benefit? We'll see. We're going to see who that benefits, but it definitely is going to change a lot of things. Now, if it doesn't rain, then I expect that, I expect them to reach that over. Now, in terms of what does USC cover the spread? Mark said it earlier. It could be one of those things where USC is leading by 4 or 5, and then USC scores a late touchdown, and now they cover. But I don't expect USC to cover that 11 to 10.5 point.
Yeah, especially anything over 10, definitely not. And really, a touchdown for me is you stay away from. I did like that one comment below that they said the total last year was 72. But that was a bit of an anomaly because Keaton Slovis, I remember in that game, had 3 passing touchdowns in the first quarter, and USC was up by 21 in that first quarter. And I actually had USC in that game, and I was very confident in the bet. And then USC's defense allowed some big plays, as they usually do. Arizona State came roaring back, and I think USC won by 7 finally. They just barely covered. But he's saying that Strange Low gave him the firepower on both sides, which is true. Both offenses could be strong. He's seen the total as low as 55. The final total last year 72. But as we mentioned, weather is definitely going to be a factor.
And not to mention, it's the first game of the season too. Yeah.
So these teams aren't going to be totally in tune. You're totally right, man.
Yeah, and then trying to interpret what that's going to mean or project what that's going to mean when we've seen it gone the way of the defense because the offense, the timing's off. And so the defense doesn't necessarily always have to make a play. The quarterback's off target, the ball's dropped, something like that. Then the defense didn't even need to make a play, but the offense is taking itself off the field by just not being yet in sync. Then we've seen it on the flip side where these defenses have been so rusty from not doing any live tackling that the offenses have paraded around like it's a circus with blown coverages and miscommunications and poor tackling and that sort of thing. Also, from the weather standpoint, real quick, Pete, I think we've seen it. Yeah, if this turns into just a complete quagmire of mud, then that certainly hampers the scoring. and I like him. I will go way back before both of your time, but we'll stay in the same city. There's a famous, look it up on YouTube, famous NFL playoff game, Rams and Vikings, 1977. So this is I'm like watching this, not even knowing what's going on, but just getting my first glimpses of NFL football on television as a little lad. But they played in a complete mud bath at the LA Coliseum for an NFL playoff game, and it was 14-7 because nobody could, they were just throwing like 6 passes.
Yeah.
But to that extent, that's one thing. But actually, if the track's reasonable, but it's slick and it's a little rainy, but it's still workable, sometimes the offenses just thrive in that because DBs are falling down. Again, the old adage that the offensive players know where they're going and the defenders don't because they've got to respond and react to everything. Then you get maybe your 45-42 game with a light rain.
Yeah, I just want to add, sorry, John, and we love your comment, but last year the total was not 72. The score last year was 31-26 USC, so that would make the total 57, which is a little lower than 72. So it makes sense why the over-under total is 55 for tomorrow because last year it was 57. But I remember that game in Arizona. It was a perfect November day, 80 degrees, no wind, no weather, and USC was up 28-7 in that first quarter. And I think it was a 4.5 point spread, which I took and thought it was an easy cover. USC was up 21 in the first quarter. Then Arizona State outscored USC 20-3 the rest of the way and finally fell 31-26. And that was without Jayden Daniels. So I saw a comment previously. It's going to be fun to watch Jayden Daniels because he's very accurate, like Slovis. He only threw 2 picks all season last year, and he can run the ball. So I think he's going to be able to adapt pretty easily to bad weather, maybe even easier than Slovis because Slovis is not a running quarterback.
Swoley Mammoth a little bit hard on USC here. It seems to me like it's been 15 years since USC was legitimately a contender. Well, if we want to be a little bit more accurate than that, 15 years is a bit much there. And depending on what you consider to be legitimately a contender, of course, they played in one of the most famous national championship games less than 15 years ago in January of 2006. And they were still winning Rose Bowls in 2008/09 against Penn State as one of the top 5 teams in the country. And of course, the Rose Bowl team from Sam Darnold and company still resulted in a top 5 finish that year nationally with a Pac-12 championship the next year and a Cotton Bowl appearance.
And yeah, I mean, Swoley Mammoth has a point that USC hasn't been a contender and hasn't lived up to expectations recently. As you mentioned, Mark, when they beat Penn State with Sam Darnold, they were as good as a team in the country that year. And Oregon has had the better track record. They've had better coaching, I would say, over the past 2 years. But Oregon lost a lot of talent this season. They lost Justin Herbert, obviously. They lost a bunch of defensive players. And they lost the best lineman in the country in Penei Sewell. He did what Jay Tufele did, and he's opting out for COVID because he's an absolute lock to be a first-round NFL draft pick. So without Penei Sewell and without some of their key defensive players, I think 4 or 5 guys on that Oregon defense opted out. Without Justin Herbert, you're going to have a new young quarterback. I'm giving unbiased, regardless about USC. I would call USC's roster right now on paper, which we know means nothing, deeper and probably favored versus an Oregon team. But that viewpoint and all those stats could change come December when we have the Pac-12 title game. Yeah, I like this comment. There was that SC Notre Dame game when Adoree Jackson went off in the rain a few years ago. He had a pick 6 for a touchdown. He had a punt return for a touchdown, a kick return for a touchdown. But those were different teams. That was when Notre Dame was struggling and USC was the top dog. But you're right, that Coliseum does get muddy.
We've got Jordan Bowman again diving deep into the roster depth chart here. Jonah Meinheim.
Yeah.
In regards to just a freshman year for him on the O-line.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, USC has 4 starting linemen coming back, including Elijah Vera-Tucker. So he'll see significant time as a backup player, but he was highly rated. He was one of USC's biggest gets he was a 2019 all prep American, All-American, but I don't think he's going to be a huge piece of this offense. I think he'll step in, and there's always injuries on the O&D line. So yeah, it's got to be next man up mentality. But USC does have some depth at the offensive line position this year.
All right. I will let you guys get in some parting shots. If you have anything else to add in regards to the USC conversation, the projection for tomorrow or outlook for the season. So, Matt, fire away.
Well, I guess as I've mentioned earlier, I think USC has a lot at stake for this game. Both teams have a lot at stake at this game, but I think USC has a huge stake because now you throw in the college football playoffs into the mix. I think if USC can win this game, and I believe they will, if USC win this game, then there's no reason for them not to run the table. Now we know USC tends to have the typical USC letdown game. We tend to see it. It happens from time to time. However, I think with 7 games on the schedule, and especially with this being by far the easiest schedule I think we've seen USC play in quite some time, I think them getting the 2 tough games out the way with Arizona State at home and then going to Utah, a place they haven't won at since I think 2012. I think was the last time they beat Utah in Salt Lake City. And given that there's no fans in attendance for this game, I think USC can run the table here going into the Pac-12 championship game. I think they have a real chance to go 7-0 here and potentially get into the college football playoffs. That will be another conversation for another day if that does indeed happen. For Saturday's game, I think this will be a close one. Don't know what it will be in terms of the weather. As you mentioned, if there is indeed rain, this could be low scoring. I could see this being anywhere in the ballpark of 31-24 USC or maybe 31-28 USC. I could see it somewhere in that ballpark, but I don't see it being a 10.5 to 11-point game for the Trojans. But I do think USC does win this game.
Yeah, no doubt. I totally agree, Matt. First of all, it's a huge resume builder for both programs. Both teams are vying for the Pac-12 South crown and that opportunity to play a likely Oregon in the Pac-12 title game. And as we mentioned, if you lose one game in the Pac-12, then you're out of the CFP. You're out of the big-time rankings. So USC's got to get out on the right foot. Todd Orlando's got to prove that he changed this defense in the offseason and that the Trojans are a more disciplined group now. I'm really excited to see the wide receiver group, which I think is the deepest in the Pac-12 and maybe the best, one of the best in the entire country. I'm excited to see 4 running backs, Marquise Stepp, Stephen Carr, who's looked the best he's ever has in a USC training camp, Vivai Malapei, who was great last year, and then Keenan Christian, their 4th string running back, who's a track star, just an absolute speedster out there. We talked about the offensive line. They got 4 guys returning, including Elijah Vera Tucker. The defense, as a lot of our viewers have commented, is maybe one of the most intriguing units to watch because they have so much talent, because they couldn't stay healthy all at once last year, and because they allowed so many big plays, and on paper they looked so good, but they came up short time and time again. I'm excited to see if all groups can come together at one, special teams included, because they got rid of Coach Baxter, their special teams coordinator, last year. And then Arizona State's going to be fun because we didn't see Jayden Daniels face a USC defense last year. He lost a big-time wide receiver in Brandon Ayuk, who had over 100 catches and almost 1,200 yards receiving for the Sun Devils last year. He's on the New England Patriots this year. So they're going to have to look to guys like Frank Darby to be their main target and offensive weapon. They also lost Eno Benjamin to the NFL draft, so they have some young running backs. They signed 3 of them to be exact out of high school that they're going to have to rely on. And really, this game is going to dictate the rest of the season for both teams because their schedules do get easier after this week. And so you got to be excited. The Pack is back, baby. Let's go. College football at 9 a.m. on a Saturday. And y'all better tune in because it could be fun. It could be a mud bowl. It could be high scoring. It could be low scoring. Either way, I'm excited.
Arizona State plucking a top 10 running back out of Ohio away from the Buckeyes as one of those 3 that Pete alludes to. And Jayden Daniels, besides the obvious giftedness as a runner and passer, it was impressive to see his poise as a freshman last year as he led the nation in fourth quarter comeback drives against some quality competition. Most notably, the first time out against Michigan State in a one of his early September appearances on the road. So that was impressive to see. Chugmo Bear, thank you so much for the super chat contribution. Mark, you're killing it. Great content. No matter what you cover, just watch 2 of your shows from yesterday. Keep up the great work, Mark. Like and subscribe to Mark's channel. Always great content. Chugmo Beer, thank you so much. I won't be able to live by the adage of your handle there today because I got too much work to do. But maybe some folks that are watching me will even have a more pleasurable experience if they do so. Also want to let people know before we let everybody go watch USC and Arizona State tomorrow. We've got a live stream coming up at 6 o'clock Eastern time. That's over on SG1 College Football. So SG1 College Football here on YouTube has asked me to do 2 live streams per week. So we're over there at 6 Eastern time. Then at 7 o'clock, a watch party on Patreon. Just go to Patreon, search MarkRogersTV, and join us there for a watch party during Miami, North Carolina State. And then we'll be on our Miami channel after the game with instant analysis if you can keep track of all that. Pete, we appreciate you stopping by. As always, great analysis from you. Enjoy the game. Matt, Conquest Chronicles, please check out his work on SB Nation. Matt, again, we appreciate you as well. So thanks for stopping by.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, a lot of fun, gentlemen. I love talking football. I love talking the lines. And, I mean, I'm just excited to wake up tomorrow morning and have a game to watch.
Absolutely. And we'll catch everybody soon. Thank you so much for the contributions. Hit that like button, and we'll see you soon.
All right, see you next week.
See you guys.